Hare Krishna, everybody, and Namaste. So today I'm dressed a little differently. As you can see, my blouse does not have sleeves, but I'm going to explain a little bit about what I'm doing today. So I'm going to give you guys like a history lesson in a way, and that comes from a question that I was asked about how come there are so many different depictions of Hindu gods and goddesses that are dressed immodestly. Yes, they're dressed immodestly by today's standards, but it's totally different than what today. I'm going to kind of give you a history lesson while kind of transforming myself into these characters. And I'm taking my look from a mix between what I saw in a Mahabharata series, which I'll link the picture below, and what I saw on a show called Mahakali. And basically, this is my history lesson for you guys while I'm doing everything. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to change my earrings, because most people, that when you see like a mythological TV show, they're wearing very heavy earrings, and my earrings are very tiny studs. And after I'm done with my earrings, I'm going to show you my outfit and how I draped it. So basically, heavy earrings in any civilization basically promoted wealth. That meant that you were wealthy, especially if you're from like an East Asian civilization or African civilization. In some African civilizations, the wealth came from how far your ears were stretched. But anyway, so here is what my sari looks like today. I kind of did a mix of what I did with one of my videos. It was like a fancier sari, but I kind of made a little bit of a pant leg to it. So very in ancient Indus Valley civilizations, women draped their saris kind of like this because it was more like practical, like they could move better. And another thing is that nobody knew how to sew in ancient India. So they would not have like blouse pieces that we have today. They would just tie a piece of cloth around their upper areas to cover. And that was considered very modest. Today it's not considered as modest. But what these serials are trying to depict, I don't think it's for like looks. I don't think it's to make the goddesses something that they weren't. I think that they're trying to promote what most people in that era would have worn. That's my opinion. But I'm going to keep on with kind of like what I'm doing. Another thing that women in these serials wear is eyeliner. Now, women nowadays wear eyeliner. It's not that big of a deal. But with them, is that they only really, in serials, you only ever see the bottom really lined. It's lined very lightly. Now, the problem is, or I guess the reasoning behind this, is because people in the Indus Valley, or people back then, weren't entirely, with makeup. Like, makeup was not a big deal. People did not use makeup for looks, they used it for practical reasons. Kohl was lined under the eye to prevent eye infections. Mostly women in the Indus Valley, it would come with the quality of their cloth, which this is not, women in the Indus Valley would definitely not be wearing this type of sari, but this would show that they were extremely, extremely wealthy. Because it's heavy, it has a border to it, very modern, but hold on a second, I think this thing popped. But people wore their cloths, and they still today, people wear saris to promote, to show how wealthy they are compared to other people in their caste. I'm trying to get this back on, there it goes. And so people were like the Banasari saris, they were pure silk saris to show that they're wealthy. That's sort of what they did. And as time progressed in the Indus Valley, when we did actually see like actual blouses with like coverings on the sleeves, only wealthier women wore them mostly, until some were in like the age of like the British. They started wearing the actual sleeves. And that leads me to my next thing, is jewelry. These are very common in most, these tikas are very common in most Middle Eastern and Asian societies. They kind of left a little bit of the Middle East for a little bit, but it came back. But it's a sign of wealth, like a crown or like anything like that. And these were not extremely popular, but they show power in a way. Does that make any sense? Like a king and a queen, you know exactly from like a European time who is the king and who is the queen. This kind of shows, well, who is like the king, who is the queen, who is what in society. And that is what it's supposed to do. Another thing is long hair. Women mostly, and men had longer hair in that time period. My hair is not as long as like a woman's would be in that time period, but I thought you guys would kind of get the hint of what I was trying to say. And like, heavy jewelry was also a huge thing back then. See if I can. Indian jewelry is different to put on than like Western jewelry. But a lot of people think that, for example, cereals are just trying to make the goddesses and gods look attractive in today's society, which they kind of are in an unrealistic way. They're like, oh, but you know, they're trying to make it look like society nowadays, and they're trying to get people. I think a lot of people don't realize is what society looked like way back in the day. Because way back in the day, they didn't have stitched shirts, they didn't have skirts, they didn't have petticoats. And I just saw like a lot of comments about this. Like I was looking while I was doing this research. People on like Quora were like, they're trying to westernize our gods and goddesses, which they're really not. They're trying to make it somewhat historically accurate, in my opinion. I could be very wrong, I could be very right. I don't necessarily know. Now another thing is nose rings. People are very common with India in like nose rings and so on and so forth. Nose rings were popular back then too. Like a lot of piercings, many societies, Middle Eastern, Indian, African, jewelry had a certain symbolic purpose. So sorry. It's trying to fix this in the monitor. People just don't realize that. And I think it's very important for people to realize what jewelry has such a strong importance today and back then. It's traditional. Here are some bangles. I'm going to put all the bangles I have. Mostly, bangles were used as an accessory, but there are some instances where bangles were used to claim a marriage to somebody or whatnot. And about nose rings is a lot of people, especially royalty, in the era that these serials are trying to portray, the bigger the nose ring, the more higher up in society you were. So many women would go around walking like this. And another thing women would do, this would be more commonly back when you're being out in public, which for royalty and women, you most likely are not going to want to be out in public. You would be here, you'd be in the confines of your castle, and you will be wearing this. Now, I do want to say, this is my note, is I got most of my information from a Western book. So this was written by people who either invaded or were not of Indian origin. They invaded. So it could be different, could be the same, but I wanted to kind of explain why Indian TV serials portray goddesses, gods, and like queens the way they do. It's not for disrespect, in my opinion. They're trying to make it historically accurate to how they are portrayed. Because, for example, you would not have a cereal, like a medieval cereal with women, in their, like, in bikinis. That would not happen. But you'd have a woman wearing something similar to this, most likely. I'm going to show the full outfit. I'm going to kind of back up a bit so you guys can kind of see. Again, I'm wearing them in like a pant style, and there is my... Now everything's falling apart, basically, is what happened. But yeah, if you're filming a serial, this would most likely be taped to the forehead. But this is just my perspective about it. I may be wrong, I may be right. Should we be portraying goddesses and gods in a more modern way? I believe I believe in a certain way that it's helpful. I believe that if we didn't, people would not be able to connect with some of the deities. Just like as I explained. People say, oh, they're not dressed modest enough. Or, if God were to come down today, what would this god or goddess look like? That's what I believe a lot of the deities. But there are certain cultures in India where they did have blouses before, like sleeves. For example, Rajasthan had the skirts when they were able to start sewing. Or when they had the materials, I should say, to start sewing. When it wasn't just about survival. Many cultures still today prefer wearing a sleeveless blouse underneath their sari. Is it right? Is it wrong to judge a culture by what they wear necessarily? What is modest and what is not modest is not universally accepted. Somebody in North India could think something's very immodest, but somebody in South India could think that something was just extremely modest, that it was way too covering. It just depends on who or what culture you ask. An Indian Muslim would have a different opinion on what was modest than a Hindu Indian. Somebody from a Jewish family thinks something's different looking than somebody from a Christian family. It's very much not up for debate what is modest and what is immodest. And it's not up for me to decide what directors should be. I'm going to give up on that. But what directors should or should not be portraying gods and goddesses like. Should they be making serials about God? Should they be doing this about God? It's not for me to decide. It's for society in general to decide what somebody or somebody did not look like. And if you're talking about like medieval serials, like for example, things about Jodha Akbar or trying to think of another good one. Marni Karnika is not really a medieval one, but like, what's a good way to depict them? My answer would be look directly in the textbooks. Don't make up things as you go. Make sure what they look like is what they would historically have looked like, if that makes any sort of sense. But what I'm going to say is that I prefer being covered more. I do not like the looks of a sleeveless blouse with a sari. I would personally not wear it out in public. But this is just my 2 cents. Now, namaste and Hare Krishna.